Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. I'm taking some cuttings because this is a very good time of year to take cuttings because a lot of the new growth has ripened a little bit, and that means that it's going to dry out and basically die back more slowly, which gives more time for the roots to develop. But because it's new shoots, they've got vigor. Now what I'm looking for are new shoots that don't have a flower bud. Taken some from this bud here, and salvias are perfect for cuttings. This is Salvia amistad, but it's not fully hardy, so I always take cuttings. I'm going to pop it straight into a polythene bag, and the reason you do that is to reduce the pace at which it dries out. Now, taking cuttings is something that you do to plan for next year, and I always think that October the 1st is New Year's Day for the gardener. All our gardening should be about preparing for next spring and summer to look as good as we possibly can. On today's programme, we find out how one man's obsession with colour and shape has filled his allotment plot with bold architectural plants.
Whether it's a problem or not with collecting, I'm not sure yet. I think maybe it's nice in some ways, but one is never enough of something.
Adam and Adverley head to North Yorkshire to uncover the work of two celebrated designers born centuries apart.
So this original dipping pond, and by all accounts, it's about 9 foot deep.
Then I've had watering cans coming in and dipping it in the dipping pond and running around and watering 4.5 acres.
And I'll be planting garlic to begin my preparation for next summer's vegetable harvest. We normally take cuttings from those plants that we like best because it's a good way to increase our stock without spending any money. But sometimes you can buy a nice, healthy plant that hasn't got a single flower on it, and that can be the mother plant. And this, penstemon, is a perfect example. It's what you and I probably know best as penstemon garnet, although actually it's had a name change to the snappy Andenken ein Friedrich Hahn. But I suspect that if you go and ask for penstemon garnet, they will give it to you. Anyway, by any name, it's a lovely plant. But penstemons, for me, are a real problem because they don't like our heavy soil and wet winters. They like good drainage, so taking cuttings is almost essential. And what you're really looking for is growth that doesn't have a bud. Nice, straight, strong growth. And you can see that the leaves are coming out from the stem there, and that's what's called a node. Cut just below it, like that. What we want to do is reduce the rate of transpiration from the plant before it gets roots that can take up more water. So that means taking off leaves. But we want to leave some leaves so that when the roots do appear, they get fed by photosynthesis. So it's a bit of a balance. But the easiest way to do it is with a sharp knife, just cut down like that, and then we'll do another one there, and on the other side. Okay, and then take a pot, and I'm using a really free draining compost. Now, there's a lot of perlite in this. For cuttings to form, they need two things, and two things only. They need oxygen, and they need water. They don't need nutrition. That comes later, once the roots have formed. And if it's too solid, and too dense, it won't have enough oxygen. If it drains too quickly, there won't be enough water. Perlite absorbs water, and then once it's saturated, the rest drains away. And then the water from the perlite is released. Use some kind of dibber so that you don't crush the stem, and pop it in against the side. Okay, let's put the other one in. Water it, don't let the soil dry out, and if you can, mist it. And you'll know that roots have formed when you see new growth. And there's no need to do anything with them over winter, just store them so they're frost-free. You can prick them out in about March, grow them on, and they'll be ready to plant out after the last frost. The thing I love about cuttings is that it's completely democratic. It doesn't matter what kind of garden you have. But sometimes it's nice to go and visit a garden that is quite unlike your own, that is big and dramatic and grand and full of history as well as modern inspiration, which is exactly what Adam and Adverley did when they went to Scampston Hall, near Malton, in Yorkshire.
Scampston Hall in North Yorkshire is packed with history, famous designers and some lovely planting. It's got a massive 4.5 acre walled garden that's been redesigned by Pete Ordoff into a series of distinctive and artful rooms.
And the parkland around the house was designed by the masterful Lancelot Capability Brown. With his exquisite eye for lakes, views and very beautiful bridges.
The estate and the house have been handed down the same family line for over 300 years. So there's been lots of stories and quite a few challenges to keep evolving this garden to modern times.
We're here to look at the tales and the triumphs.
I'll be rolling up my sleeves. This could go horribly wrong.
And discovering ancient rooms. That is just downright dangerous.
As we get let loose on this glorious historic estate.
Scampston Hall was built in the 1690s by William St Quintin III. He was an MP for 11 terms of office and, as was common at that time, guaranteed his post by paying the local voters. Over the years, it cost him nigh on £11,000. That's over £1 million in today's money.
Wow, I wonder what it would have meant to be an MP back then.
Lots of goodies, I expect. Subsequent generations have been much more productive with their money. The walled garden was an early addition next to the house and grew the usual cut flowers and veg, while the conservatory would have had exotics and fresh fruit.
It's been recently restored, but there are some untouched treasures tucked away in the gardener's yard. If I'm really honest, as a gardener, I would be happier here in the engine room than anywhere else in the garden. Back in the day, this would have been buzzing with people. So there's 4 gardeners here today. How many roughly would there have been then?
Oh, at least 20.
Wow.
Easily, at least 20, because you needed somebody to do every single little job.
Yeah.
So you'd have your little pot boys, your boys watering the pots, and you might become a specialist in a glass house, gaining all this sort of knowledge as you went along with the sole purpose of being a head gardener.
And I know some of this has not been done up, but these presumably look, you know, like hotbeds.
I think these are melon pits.
Yeah.
And what they would do is that put tanner's bark, which would create that heat as it was fermenting, and then you put soil on top, and you could always use them to grow pineapples as well.
Yeah. What's lovely is we're still doing that today. So my version, modern day, 4 pallets on their sides, tied together, horse manure or something that's going to create that heat, soil on top, early crops, late crops.
Bob's your uncle.
Exactly, exactly. But yeah, for me, this would have definitely been a happy place.
Scampston has worked hard to preserve and respect its history. This glass house is next to be renovated, and there are lovely details here, like this bell at the walled garden gate which summoned the gardeners when visitors arrived.
Then, when designer Pete Ordoff arrived, just over 20 years ago, he honoured that history. So this, original dipping pond, and by all accounts, it's about 9 foot deep.
Really?
Yeah, so it would have been spring fed, and presumably they would have used this to water everything out the back there, wouldn't they?
The whole garden. You need a lot of water because they'd have had watering cans coming in and dipping it in the dipping pond and running around and watering 4.5 acres. You know, it's a lot of water, isn't it?
It's crackers as well, though, isn't it? But what I love as well is the fact that he's kept that and must have designed the rest of the garden off it. So it's got a lovely sort of sight line through, and you start to build the rest of these rooms. And for me, this place, I've seen so many pictures over the years, because this is quite a famous garden, you know, in the design world. You know, so just to get under the skin of it, I think would be really good.
Talking of water, I've heard that there's a plunge pool, a ladies' plunge pool over there. It's one of Capability Brown's, and they're quite unusual because he's normally garden designer, engineer, but every now and again he dabbled in architecture. And it's a small space where the ladies could just go in there and get their, you know, little knees wet, and I can't wait.
Yeah, you can see that you've got that look in your eye. You can't wait, can you? Come on. Yeah.
We will discover whether Adderley takes the plunge or not, because we're going back to Scampston later in the programme. There is a lot more to see, believe you me. Now, a few weeks ago, I suggested that you might like, as a job for the weekend, to take runners from your strawberries. And I've got some here. I pinned a runner into soil so that it would root. So all I have to do now is cut it free from the parent and just take that there, cut that, and now I have a strawberry plant. And I would say the time to plant that out is in about 3 weeks' time into the garden. You could leave it in the pot over winter and plant it out in spring, but if you can get it into the ground while the soil is still warm, it will establish quicker. Now you can see this one has put out another runner, so that should be removed too. I'll just take that off. I think all of us gardeners share the thrill of growing a new plant, new vegetable or fruit, or even creating a new border. But tackling a brand new garden from scratch is daunting for anyone, and particularly as you get older. However, for one of our viewers in Swansea, this is a challenge that she is embracing with enthusiasm.
Hello, my name's Anne, and welcome to my garden. It's a fairly new garden. I moved here about 4 years ago. It's the first time that I have started a garden conscious of pressure of time. Since I was nearing my 80th birthday, I felt a sense of my own mortality. A person in their 80s may not have the energy to spend on the garden that, for instance, I would have had in my 40s. I think one of the things is to have an awareness that if you can't maintain it, it needs to be something that's easily maintained by someone else. I certainly was aware that I couldn't start with very young trees. I wanted to have trees which were mature enough to have an impact, but not so big that I was unable to care for them as they got established. It's really essential to me to have a garden, even if it was a very small one, to just be able to handle plants. I like getting my hands in the soil. I just like spending time outdoors talking to the plants.
I think that's really inspirational, not just for those of us whose youth is in a dim and distant past, but for anyone of any age, that it's never too late to start something new. And for Anne to make a wonderful garden at an age when she could be forgiven for taking things easy and looking back more than forward, I think is a lesson for all of us. And long may she enjoy her lovely garden. Now, I had here growing courgettes, but they were really good this year and we've enjoyed them all summer. But now that's over, I've got a free bed and I'm going to plant some garlic. Garlic needs winter cold. They really should be planted by Christmas at the very latest. And I like to get them into the ground, well, as early as mid-September sometimes, and certainly in October. If you don't have cold weather, if you plant garlic, say, in February or March, they'll grow, but they'll just make one bulb like an onion. To get them to divide, you need that cold period. And as you will know, I'm a fan of elephant garlic, and that's what I'm planting today. It's milder, you can use it in many more things, and it's very easy to handle because each individual clove is that big. They're whoppers. And all garlic should be planted pointy end up. And try and work on getting sort of 3-4 inches of soil above the top of the pointy tip. And you grow it exactly the same as any other kind of garlic. I allow for elephant garlic about 18 inches between each clove. For normal garlic, about 9 inches, and it does best in quite rich soil. So add fresh compost to wherever you're going to plant it, whether it's in a container or in a bed. And it does need plenty of water as it's growing. And it does like sunshine. There's no good growing garlic in the shade. Well, I hope that in allotments all over Britain, garlic of various types will be planted out, except for one, because I can guarantee that in Andy Gladman's allotment in Leamington Spa, garlic is one of those plants that will not feature.
I think now, looking at the allotment as it is, I think there's something quite special when you're sat in a garden where everything you see around you is because of your work and you're sort of the master of your own little domain, I suppose, and it's definitely a sense of pride as we sit in the allotment now. As you can see around me, my allotment is completely dedicated to ornamental plants and spiky plants, so it's completely different to what everyone else around me is doing, growing vegetables. So by day, I'm a PhD researcher, so I'm in my final year now, and I've been working on the control of aphids on brassicas. At work, I'm growing brassicas all day. I'm doing lots of trials, testing them, seeing how resistant they are. When I come to my allotment, to be honest, I don't really want to see any brassicas. People in my family have always been fond of growing plants, so I can definitely remember being dragged around the garden centres and the nurseries as a child. I'd always be drawn to the cacti and succulents. I think that's often the case with children. They're sort of so unique and so different. That's definitely impacted the plants that I really like to grow now. It's this architectural form, these plants that really stand out. They're almost statuesque in their shapes. There's lots and lots of tall plants here, so this is the third year that I've had the plot now, so the plants have really settled in. We're quite lucky here with the nice stony, loamy soil, so I added a bit of organic matter, and beyond that, the plants just do what they do. I quite like planting taller plants towards the front. I think that gives you a more interesting look, and mixed in with the shrubs, I think it really adds that height, which makes it more interesting. I think I'm just a big fan of the architectural shapes of the plants. I'm always getting in trouble with my partner for putting them too close to the front of the borders, these big spiky plants. I think when you grow such spiky plants, you have to get used to spending an evening pulling some prickles out of your fingers. That's something I spend quite a lot of time doing, but I think it's worthwhile for the plants that I love. This allotment has very much been set up for creating the ideal habitat for the plants, and then the design has come in sort of second to the plants. So these in front of me, these are quite a wonderful plant, which I've recently grown from seed. These are Echinops spinosissimus. So it's a plant that I suspect very few people would recognise, but they're incredibly spiky. I've had people describe them more as a mace in the flower form, either a mace or firework. So this is one of my favourite plants on the allotment. This is Burkheya cercifolia. It's a South African spiky daisy. It has this really spiky architectural foliage. It's definitely not one I think many people would want to put it right at the front of the border, but they're always stunning, and it doesn't matter where you put them, they'll always stand out as some of the feature plants. So this is a really wonderful sea holly. This is Eryngium planum. As you can see, it's absolutely covered in bees, so you have to be careful when you're touching it, but it really stands out in the allotment. I think that there's definitely no doubt that I have whether it's a problem or not with collecting, I'm not sure yet. I think maybe it's nice in some ways, but one is never enough of something. I think with plants, it's a nice thing to be able to collect because you end up with a garden with diversity in the different forms, which I think really adds to the sort of dramatic look of a garden like this. So one of the plant groups that I really love and originally had loads of on the first allotment was red hot pokers. So as I've been growing more of them, I've sort of started to make a bit of a collection now. You have this huge range of red hot pokers that flower sort of June till August. We have one which is Nymphophia painted lady. So this is a nice, really tall red hot poker variety, and you have this nice fade from sort of an orangey red down to a cream. Another nice variety that you can get are smaller American cultivars like Poco Orange. These have been bred to have grassy leaves. I think sometimes when people think of red hot pokers, they think of these really huge, brash, loud, brutish plants. But trying to breed them for the opposite, they're supposed to be more dainty. So I think my first experience with red hot pokers was probably in my nan's garden. I was very drawn to them as a child just because of how different they are, how sort of tactile the flowers are as well, almost that you want to reach out and grab the plants. And when I took on the allotment, I knew that was definitely a type of plant I wanted to try and get as many different ones of as I could, just so that I could enjoy seeing the different flowers throughout the season. One of the groups along with the spiky plants that I really like are thistles, so usually plants in the genus Cirsium. Two nice thistles that I've got here around me. The first one just behind me, this is Cirsium tuberosum. So this is a UK native. It's that classic purple thistle. This is quite a nice tall one, so planted at the front of the border, it's quite sort of airy, you can see through it. This one just in front of me, this is Cirsium oleraceum. This one is native to Central Europe. The flowers, when you look at them, they're much more cream in colour. Still really good for pollinators, and again, nice and tall at the front of a border. In Eastern Europe and China, they actually grow this as an edible crop. So when the plant is quite young, you get this nice rosette of leaves at the bottom, and people actually harvest that as a salad crop. I can't say I've tried it yet, but maybe next year. So I think having an allotment where everyone around me is growing lots of vegetables, the second they find out that I'm researching aphids on brassicas, almost immediately I get the questions of what should I do about aphids on my plants. I think the best advice I usually give is immediately rubbing off the aphids. You're causing a stress response in the aphids around them. This is releasing a chemical called aphid alarm pheromone, and it's the release of that actually has been proven to attract in predators and parasitoids from nearby plants. I think when I took on the allotment, I had in this mind it was almost like a practice garden for maybe a future house. So Perhaps I got a bit carried away with my practice, but I can't imagine my life without a lot of these plants now. So I think that in some way or form, these plants are always going to be with me, and there's probably going to be new ones along the way that will get added to the collection of collections. But I think that's probably a nice thing, if anything else.
It's quite unusual to see an allotment devoted solely to flowers, and in fact, Andy had to have special permission to do that, but I thought it looked great. Now, this time of year, I'm relishing the colour while it lasts, and for the next couple of weeks, there's still plenty of colour here in the Jewel Garden. The oranges and the burgundies and the purples and magenta and strong reds. But actually, as the light gets lower, the colours get darker and richer and more opulent. I cling on to them for every day that they last. Now, still to come on today's programme. Adam and Adderley dig deeper into the grounds and gardens of a historic home in North Yorkshire.
They used to use it as a viewing mount, so they could look out over the garden and they could look over the walls and the hedges to the wider landscape.
See, to me, that's the clever bit.
And I shall be adding to my sloping borders on the mound with herbaceous perennials. But first we go to London to visit the roof garden of Debbie Friedman.
This is our garden. It's a roof garden, and from the outside it looks like a sort of slatted wooden box. We have what we call an intensive roof garden system. You only have about 12 inches of soil, that's 30 centimetres of soil, which is made up of very lightweight recycled bricks and clay and a bit of composted bark. And it's lightweight, obviously, because it's sitting on top of a roof. Also, because the garden is built on a slope for the drainage, all the water drains out towards the left. So the things we've been able to grow reasonably well are, say, this cordyline here, which was really tiny. There's a row of them here, and they've grown incredibly quickly. In this bed, which is the dry bed, we have some Russian sage, some salvias, also some zebra grass further up the bed, and some rosemary, and various other perennials like the penstemon. And they've all done fairly well, provided that we keep watering them. So something that's pretty amazing is, as soon as you put down a bit of earth and you put in a few plants, how quickly the space gets colonized by insects, by ants and woodlice, by bees, and even we've had the occasional dragonfly passing through. All in all, it's been the most beautiful experience, really, really enjoyable watching this garden take shape, watching it thrive.
I don't know about you, but I was convinced initially that Debbie's garden was on the ground. It was really very, very clever. I've been making big changes as part of the evolution of the mound. I started to plant up these borders with shrubs a few weeks ago, and now I want to do the next stage, which is adding herbaceous plants. October is a really good month to plant herbaceous plants, to move herbaceous plants, because the roots will get into the warm soil, grow and get established before the cold weather comes. Now I'm starting with some daylilies. This is Hemerocalis. It's called Hyperion. And the great thing about Hemerocalis is they are very adaptable, and they certainly cope with good drainage and even drought, which of course is what the slope is all about. A sloping border is one that drains well. just start by placing them where you think they might work. So we're just thinking like that. Now, this is cheating a little bit because this is Perovskia, Russian sage. And Perovskia is technically a shrub. It doesn't die right back. But I've never been able to grow it successfully here at Longmeadow because our soil is too heavy and too wet for it to thrive. This is a plant that likes good drainage, sunshine, and will cope with actually relatively poor soil. So to have a slope means that for the first time, I can give this a go. So we could put one there, I think. And that will grow up about 3-4 foot tall with rather lovely, delicate foliage. Right, this is the last of the larger herbaceous plants. And this is Baptisia, Baptisia australis. And this has got blue mauve flowers and this lovely glaucous foliage, and again needs good drainage. So we'll put that there. And I quite like the idea of it being high up here. Now, as you can see, I've got more to plant. This is just the beginning, but it's time to go back to Scampston, where Abbeville is exploring its 18th century history.
When Capability Brown took on an estate like Scampston Hall, he didn't just tackle the garden, he redesigned the entire parkland around the house. In the 1700s, it was all the rage to look out onto a designed landscape with big lakes and avenues of trees. Brown came to Scampston in 1773 and he was paid the grand sum of £100 to do his stuff. There's 80 acres of parkland which was flat, so he planted copses and contoured the land to make new lakes and new bridges. Scampston got a very, very special one. Isn't this wonderful? This is the Palladian Bridge with pillars that nod to classical architecture. It's an immensely elaborate and beautiful way to cross the water. Brown's Lake was originally a stream, so while the view is wide and lovely at the front, it's much less majestic round the back. As a result, garden historians have a special name for it. It's known as a sham bridge, which seems a bit harsh for something so gorgeous, especially as this one comes with extras. Tucked in the stream, there's a tiny dam with a little cascade, and at the back of the bridge, he built an extra room with a half-moon window, all rather mysterious. I've got the key, and it's really exciting. That is just downright dangerous. This is absolutely incredible. There's no floor, no steps. It looks very, very deep, and the water comes from the lake in front of the Palladian Bridge. It's absolutely amazing. While men could swim in the lake, it was unseemly for women, so this is a plunge pool. It would have had steps, painted walls, and probably some pretty drapes overhead. So they would have just done this, wafted gently, because it's a really small space. But here, small is special. You don't see these very often. In fact, this is the first one that I've ever seen as a garden historian, which is why it's so exciting. Out front, Brown's beautiful lake bends around a corner, luring visitors to explore. And it's worth it for the spectacular new view of the bridge. Isn't that lovely with its reflection? And the next feature, you can almost hear it before you see it. It's another classic Brown technique, tantalising visitors by the sound of water. It's made by the big cascade he built at Scampston. This dam's yet another lake and was remodelled in the 1960s when the original stonework collapsed. The water rushed down at such a rate it flooded some houses on the estate. So the cascade was rebuilt using concrete to make it stronger. Some of Brown's stone is still visible just under the water. And the lake above is huge. To make it, he recontoured the land completely, but that wouldn't have fazed him. It was common practice to divert entire roads round your design, just like this one, and then put in a cleverly angled bridge. It meant that passing carriages caught a tantalising glimpse of the house. Moving tons of earth and the odd road is exactly why Lancelot Brown was given his middle name. When Brown visited houses, he rode around surveying the landscape, spotting what he called capabilities in different areas. So he would say, well, that has capabilities, that has capabilities. And so the nickname stuck. He was no fool, and if a lovely feature was nearby, he incorporated it, like the elaborate field shelter, or this ice house, which was packed with ice and straw to keep food cold. Both would have helped stretch the budget, as his £100 fee is about £8,000 in today's money, not much for a whole parkland. Brown was a master of illusion, creating beautiful landscapes that have impressed visitors for almost 300 years. But maybe he hadn't banked on a nosy Adam Frost.
This is rather lovely, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
And interesting, I came up here, and as sad as I am, I love stonework and brickwork. I started doing that and thought, that doesn't feel quite right, and then it definitely doesn't sound right. They're hollow.
Interesting you should say that. When the owners were having these pillars restored, they discovered they were made of wood, because obviously it was cheaper than stone.
Wow. So, I mean, in a way, so much of it was about show.
Absolutely. Totally.
Yeah.
Showmanship.
But what I really want to know, I want to know if you went in the plunge pool. Did you?
No, I didn't, because it would have been really cold. It's very deep, and I haven't brought my swimming costume with me.
I'm slightly disappointed. I thought that excitement, you would have bound to have gone in the pool. But there you go.
I think Anthony was wise not to take the plunge. I don't think I would have been overly keen either. We will be going back to Scampston when Adam will be sharing the beauties of its modern present garden. Now you can see I have put the plants in the ground. And the next stage is to look at the lower level. And eventually, I don't want to see any bare soil at all. And when you're planning a border, it's always a good idea to think of it as 3 levels: ground floor, mid, and top. Now, the ground floor plant par excellence for any herbaceous border are hardy geraniums. And what I've got here is a really well-known, tried and tested one. It's Johnson's Blue. Really good flower, lovely blue. And that will make a mound that is about that sort of size and that sort of spread. So we can put that near the front. And as well as Johnson's Blue, I've got what is now become the most popular hardy geranium of all, which is Roseanne. And this is rightly popular because it just goes on flowering. It will start flowering in June or even late May and carry on and on right through summer, well into autumn. So we'll put Roseanne there. One of the many virtues of hardy geraniums is they're very flexible. They will grow in almost any soil and certainly take semi-shade. Now, most of this is geared towards a display from late spring into late summer. But I have got some herbaceous plants that start flowering early in the year. I've got 2 spring plants, which are amongst my favourites. They're the same family. They're primulas, but actually they behave very differently. I've got Primula vulgaris, the common primrose, probably my favourite plant of all, which is essentially a woodland plant. So these are plants that have evolved to flower before the foliage above them appears. So I can put this around the corner on the darkest side over here. Now the other primula, Primula veris, is very different. It's the cowslip. Now cowslips like to grow in open grassland. They like good drainage and they like lots of sunshine. And I've got them here because I intend to plant these up at the top of the slope, underneath the espalier pears, where they will get maximum sunshine. The drainage will be good, and they will flower round about May time. So what we've got now is the makings of a border. I will add some bulbs later on in autumn, and in spring I'll sow some annuals and add those too. And it all comes down in the end to that old adage, it's right plant, right place. If you give a plant the conditions that it wants to grow in, then it will be completely trouble-free, happy and beautiful. Now, for our last visit to one of your gardens, I think we certainly have a case of the right plant in the right place. It's just that that place is probably not where you would expect it to be.
Hello, I'm Dr. Guan Lim, one of the doctors in Epsom General Hospital, which is in Surrey. So we've been very busy the last 18 months, as you can imagine, with COVID. So we got some seeds and we've planted a vegetable garden in our hospital office. So here we are, and these are the 2 large windows we have in our office. And we've been growing a variety of vegetables. And here is a tomato plant, which is providing us with lunch. We have several varieties of chilies, some long chilies, some shorter chilies. So we've been growing really more tropical vegetables because it's very hot in this office. Over here we have a Thai green basil plant, which is growing really well. And you can see that we have a cucumber that's doing rather well in the window. And we're most proud of this particular plant, which is a rather unusual vegetable. It's a Chinese bitter gourd, which is very, very tender and it likes a lot of heat. And it's growing beautifully. We've harvested quite a few of this fruit already. It's particularly prized by our Filipino nurses. And over here is some of the chilies that we harvested this morning for making a pickle. I hope that you like seeing our garden. The garden has made us very happy and it's providing us with lots of vegetables.
I loved Dr. Guan Lim's garden. Not at all what you might expect in a hospital office, but what a brilliant use of space. And I bet it tastes great too. Now, talking about space, there's an empty space there where my outdoor tomatoes were. But a week ago, tomato blight appeared with a vengeance, and it can do that practically overnight. And as many of you know, when blight hits your tomatoes, it's pretty devastating. They turn brown and soggy, and it looks disastrous. Although I would say that if you've got a fruit that is unaffected, even though the whole of the plant is affected, it's perfectly edible and perfectly safe. And the plants should either be bagged up so they can be taken away, or if you've got the opportunity, burn them. Now, to protect our indoor tomatoes, we stripped all the leaves off, and that does two things. It dramatically improves ventilation, and ventilation is the best way of countering blight. But by taking the leaves off, we're improving ripening. And once you get to October, for most of us, the ripening days are rapidly diminishing. And any tomatoes that are too small to eat, forget. And certainly any flowers are not going to produce any fruit. So what you could do is just cut off any growth above the top ripe tomato and hope that the others will ripen over the next week or so. Now it's time to go back to Scampston and visit their wall garden, which of course was originally a vegetable garden, producing fruit and vegetables for the big house, but 20 years ago was redesigned completely by the great Dutch designer Piet Oudolf.
In 1999, Scampston Hall brought in designer Piet Oudolf to redesign their 4.5-acre walled garden. Starting from scratch, he embarked on a massive planting project, creating a series of superb garden rooms. Some packed with flowers, others with form and structure. Over 20 years later, it's really marched on. But as with creating any garden, nothing ever goes quite as planned. And managing something on this scale is a mammoth task. But we've got a head gardener that's up to the job. Andy Karovich came here in 2020 with the aim to bring the garden back to its true Oudolf roots. What's it been like coming into this, which to me already looks like a gorgeous garden?
Yeah, it's exciting. And walking in, beautiful colours everywhere. But it just felt the colours were going and the design was almost slipping. It wasn't particularly Piet Oudolf anymore because his style's so kind of distinctive. So putting the design back where it was, putting plants back that have basically been outcompeted, and then take it from there.
Andy's known as the Grim Reaper, as he's taken out tangled perennial beds completely, dividing the plants and recreating the original layout. And it's not just the herbaceous plants.
The formality of the garden was just, it wasn't sharp. He used his formal structure against the softer plantings to accentuate the softness as well as the hardness of the hedges. So it's been a lot of hedge cutting, not just with a hedge cutter, but with chainsaws, to actually get to the height that is needed.
These Katsura trees are next. They'll be coppice, so they are more balanced with the rest of the garden. But in the spring garden, the cubes of pen-sharp box are being managed for blight and left to grow. And sort of shape-wise here, because you've got these sort of, well, they're not...
The fluffy bits in the middle.
Yeah, the fluffy, that's...
The fluffy bits in the middle.
Yeah.
Right, so the idea of the fluffy bits is meant to be a dome. A clever blacksmith is going to make us a lovely kind of dome made out of copper, so it sits nicely in the box so it doesn't sink. And then we can just use hedge cutters, sheep shears to be able to cut around it.
I think he'd be really chuffed that you're taking it back to that detail.
Yeah, I think it's important. And these domes actually mirror with the dome of the house, which is slightly hidden behind the trees this time of year.
Andy found the dome detail on the original plans and also discovered bowl-shaped cutouts on the yew hedges at either end. He's made a start already. So all you've got to do now is cut that out there.
Do you know what I thought? As you're with us, as a guest, I think it's your honour to cut it for us.
No, what you were going to say, I think it might be quite funny.
I was going to go, I think it might be quite funny.
You could actually
Yes.
hear you say it.
Yeah.
So, and also if it goes horribly wrong, you know, you don't get sacked.
Yeah, exactly. That's the plan.
And what's great about you is it's really forgiving. It
Yeah,
grows
exactly.
back.
Yeah, if we get this really wrong, it's like a bad haircut, isn't it?
Yeah, it will grow back. Let's see if it works, mate.
Yeah, this is the moment of truth.
Yeah, it works, pal. It really does. That shape, as you get those domes right, that will bounce all the way
Yeah.
down through there to the house.
Amazing.
Brilliant. The rest of the garden is work in progress, but a very beautiful one. This garden is a series of rooms, and you can feel straight away when you walk in that they're all going to carry just very slightly different atmospheres. And here, this is called the Millennia Waves Garden. Well, it does what it says on the tin. You've got these waves of millennia going right across the site. And you can see people are going to walk in and think, actually, it's just a load of grasses. But in reality, it's not. And I think it draws you down and in. I love that simplicity, but also the big, bold blocks. And they work really well against the horizontal of the lawn. Just next door is another garden and another incredible atmosphere. Wow, this feels completely different. There's an eeriness about it. I've even got that slight shivery thing going on. But moving from one space to the other, there's a calmness in here, which is incredible. Straight away you're drawn to this central pool. And then you look at it, it's an ever-changing picture. The sky is just reflective. There's a dark cloud there at the moment, and it's really moody. This is called the Silent Garden, and you can see why. You look closely and you've got these big columns of taxus that don't really move through the space because they're quite static, but they're big and they're very, very bold. So, how could you distill this calm at home? Well, I think it's in front of me. It's amazing, that scene that's going on, but it doesn't have to be that big. It could just be a container this big outside the back door, cup of coffee, wonderful light and cloud in the sky, and you got yourself a changing piece of art. This is a fabulous garden, being returned almost to living history. As one of Pete's earliest designs, his last section is masterful. A modern mound created from spoil, and also a nod to the past. This has been incredible because even though, in reality, compared to what you've been walking around, this is a landscape that's only 20 years old. Yeah. But it sits really comfortably. And this, as a finishing spot, just to come and have a look, it's wonderful, isn't it?
It's fabulous because he's created this wonderful Elizabethan feature. They used to use it as a viewing mount, so they could look out over the garden and they could look over the walls and the hedges to the wider landscape.
See, to me, that's the clever bit, because obviously you wall something in, you enclose it, but you give yourself that opportunity still to connect with what's going on outside.
Look over. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's lovely. The way that the authors thought about this, there's so many details through this garden that connect this place to the past, you know?
Yeah.
But it still feels modern. and I love it.
Totally agree. Yeah.
To combine a really important historical garden with a wonderful modern one is inspirational. And I think anybody who possibly can should go and see it. The windfalls are beginning. In fact, the apples this year are not so much a disappointment as a much, much smaller harvest than last year. Last year was a bumper crop. And it's very common to have a small crop in the year following an extra large one. So if that's happening to you, don't worry. It's nothing that you've done wrong. And when you do pick apples, treat them like an egg. Handle them very carefully. Test to see if it's ripe by twisting it gently and lifting it up to the horizontal. And if it doesn't come away in your hand, gently lower it back and leave it. And having picked it, store it somewhere cool, dark and slightly humid. So a cellar is perfect, or a shed, or garage. And if you can find the right conditions, apples will store for months and months. Now, this is a job that I do daily throughout the whole of October, but here are some jobs you can do now, this weekend. A few weeks ago, I suggested that you sow hardy annuals for next spring. And if you did so, like mine, they'll be ready for pricking out. Take each seedling by a leaf, not the stem, and gently ease it out of the compost with as much root as possible, and then replant them into individual plugs or small pots. These can then be stored in a cold frame until next spring, when they can be put into their final position. Although we're coming into autumn, weeds will go on growing for at least another month or so. So try and get as many of them out now as you possibly can. And then, if you can mulch on top of that, so much the better. Either way, you'll make your life next spring a lot easier. Autumn onion sets fill the gap in early spring, long before the spring planted ones are ready for harvest. If you haven't got room in the garden, or like me, your soil is very wet and heavy, it's a good idea to put them into plugs in order to develop roots and shoots. And then, when you're ready and you've got space, plant them out into the soil. What has become a feature of the Paradise Garden at this time of year are the few pots I've got of amarines. Now, these are a cross between nerine and amaryllis. Put the two together and you get a much more robust plant than the nerine, but something with a little bit more style and elegance than your average amaryllis great trumpet of flower. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this week. But we will be back next week with a special one-hour program devoted to trees. Until then, bye-bye.